you're getting a team I think in USC was kind of funny. They're getting healthy, but you look at the Big Ten as a whole, and I think we like who we like at the top at the top, right? You like Michigan State. I think people like Michigan. We like
Hmm.
Illinois. Still not really sure, and we're going to talk to Kevin Kugler at 9, and I'm still not sure what to make of Ohio State. I think they're pretty good. I think Wisconsin is pretty good. There's going to be a tricky one tonight. I think Indiana and Northwestern play tonight in that rivalry, and you never like. I think Northwestern is favored, which is it's just a weird league.
Hmm.
What's the point that you think Nebraska's got to get to not be bubblicious? I used to think it was 10. You could
Yeah.
probably talk me into 9. The path is daunting regardless. It's got to start tonight clearly, but what is the break line do you think right now for the Big 10?
I think within your question, you said it. I was with you. If you said right, before the season, what's the number? I would have said, well, you got to get to 10. I always feel like you got to get 500 in the league. And that I know there's cases where you don't have to be there, but it's where you sort of feel more comfortable. I do think it's maybe 9, but there's a lot of lifting to do
Yeah.
at this point still. You're 2-5 right now, and that's why tonight is got to have it type of game, especially when you look at the schedule. You go to Wisconsin, then it's Illinois, then at Oregon. Those are the next 3 for Nebraska after this one. And all those are quad one games. I think all those, at least as of yesterday, all 3 of those teams after tonight that Nebraska plays had a net of 22 or higher. And so, there's opportunity there. But like, let's say Nebraska does handle business tonight and won one of those 3, I think the reaction around here would be kind of like feeling down in the dumps because, they're still 4-7 at that point. But I think their metrics actually would be okay at that moment. So that leads you to believe like you if you got one of those quad one wins and tonight and you're 4-7 going to the stretch, I think you could get to like 9 or so and get in. But we'll see how it kind of plays out. I'll have teams are going to knock each other around a little bit, but Huskers got to just get back to playing with that sort of carrying the hammer as they seem to have done for a long time in PBA, and they didn't do it last week. Like we're used to seeing, and you got to just say to yourself, all right, time to start a new streak here. The last one's gone. Let's go again.
It's interesting. I think of the 4 game skid, which game bothers you the least? Because I'd probably try to make the case it was Maryland. like, I, even though
Mm-hmm.
I felt like that was one definitely winnable,
Gettable. Yeah.
clearly gettable, but it didn't leave as bad a taste in my mouth as maybe some of the others. Is there something in the 4 where you're like, okay, I can build and go glass half full?
Maryland bothered me the least from how Nebraska competed and how they represented themselves in the game. The outcome that bothered me the least was actually Purdue, just because even though it was just so lopsided and a ridiculous score, I didn't have much hope going into that. And that's probably a bad way to look at it because, Purdue got beat last night at home. But just outside looking in, I wasn't expecting as much from that game. And so it was a disappointing showing, don't get me wrong, but I shrugged my shoulders a little bit more about it. But I get the point about Maryland because I felt like even after the game when you heard Hoiberg talk, he saw like, okay, this is more the team that I expect. Like they're doing the things that I think is going to make this a good basketball team the rest of the way. And so I think as a coach, whenever you see that and there's pieces you can take from a game, even in defeat, that are going to be useful going forward, you don't feel quite as bad. So that's probably the right answer. The Maryland game. Nonetheless, man, that's an opportunity that just slips through your grasp in the last 50 seconds. And I was talking about it with Schaefer the other day. It just feels like Nebraska has won some clutch games at PBA over the last year. Don't get me wrong, where they've been up like 4 or 5 with 2 minutes left, and someone hits a big three to sort of lock it up. I do feel like the Huskers have really struggled in these games, and there's been a few of them where it's tied with like a minute left, and it can go either way. And that last minute, it just seems like always slipped in the wrong direction. So they're going to need to grab a couple games like that, where it's a nail biter, someone hits a shot with 5 seconds left. I think there's going to be some moment like that still in the season, and Nebraska's got to have it, where it's sort of always gone to the other jersey so far.
We're talking with Brian Christopherson, Husker247. BC, you kind of touched on a little bit there some of the commonalities you've seen throughout the season, but it felt like, at least in the 4-game losing streak, a lot of the losses felt a little different than one another. Can you kind of put your finger on a common thread, whether it's in the 4-game losing streak or throughout the course of the season, that's been the most concerning for you? Or is it all over the place?
I think one common thread, and Hoiberg said it after the Rutgers game, when they're playing really good defense, they're crashing hard, and the other team might get their shots up behind the arc. But like, even if you go back to the Creighton game, it felt like Nebraska was coming so hard after everything. They were forcing very difficult passes. They were so active with their hands. There's all these deflections. There was nothing comfortable, even though there were shots to be had for the offense. And if you look at the losses, for whatever reason, that's waned a little bit defensively in a lot of those games, where teams have been allowed to make like kind of that looping pass, and the guy has time and the space to set up and shoot. And that's why teams hit 48 3-pointers on you over a stretch of 3 games, and so I feel like if they're going to be that team they want, that identity, gritty, grimy, it's just got to be so active and so intense on that end of the floor, where every pass feels the opposition feels like the degree of difficulty goes up. And so that's the biggest thing to me, is just being active, getting deflections, and making teams have to make great passes to get shots. And I don't think that's always been the case.
BC, do you like like's not the word. Okay, students are back. It's 8 p.m. tip. It's a little late. It's extremely important, obviously, at home. Do you like how it sets up in any fashion?
Yeah, I do. I thought the arena, I would never knock the Husker hoops fans, because those folks have stood by this program. I've been to games where Husker basketball has been, below 500, really stinking it up, and you'll still get, 8, 9, 10,000 for a game, and that would not be everywhere. I did think, and I think people who were in the arena that wore their red would say it wasn't as lively against Rutgers, and it, for whatever reason, because it was a good game, actually. It was a game where I think you could add that impact, and it might have been because the defensive end was lacking a little bit, and they couldn't shut the faucet off on some of those superstars, and so people never got comfortable. But I think tonight there will be a little bit, not a little bit, I think there will be a sense of desperation in the gym. And the key, though, is the team has to, in the first 8 minutes of this game, show that they feel the same way. Because when this thing is really rolled, they really do feed off each other. Like that, they make some plays on the defensive end. That crowd appreciates it. Sammy Hoiberg comes in and gets a steal or something, and it lifts people up. And then there's a lull at some point, and the crowd lifts Nebraska up, the team. And so they do need that back, and I think the students being in the gym was going to help. And it looks like they got some sweet crew necks too. That beats they're giving out crew necks to the students. And when I was a student at UNL, I got like a Haynes Kamani is my friend t-shirt, I think. So I think they've upgraded.
I don't know. Kamani is my friend is peak pun, and you got to appreciate that. Like, I get the quality of the t-shirt. No offense to Haynes.
Yeah.
May not have been great.
Yeah.
but
maybe it wasn't Haynes, but yeah, that's where I'm going, Ravi. It was a different the quality. I think these kids got to appreciate the quality of material they're getting these days. They're going to be getting like dry fit stuff at some of these events, and I mean I was getting this stuff where like if you go sweating in a little bit, you can't wear the shirt again. But it was a cool phrase they had. They had one for Stephon Bradford too. I can't remember specifically. That was maybe a little edgy that you couldn't get away with now. But nonetheless, they're going to have some cool crew necks tonight, and I'm happy for them, even if I feel like it's better quality than I got.
Excuse me.
BC, I have to ask this because, and I'm not trying to be a hater here, but I'm sitting here and I watch this Nebraska team and I go, okay, they don't seem to be quite good enough defensively to hang their hat on their defense. They don't seem to be quite dynamic enough offensively to get into these shootouts with Rutgers and Iowa. Like, where does that leave them? Or am I misrepresenting?
No, I think it's a worry spot. I think there's a lot of skeptics who are saying the same thing right now. And it's up to this team to prove that they do have answers to a couple of those things. And I feel like there is a danger zone with this team, though, because they can do one thing well for a little while, and then the other thing maybe betrays them. You know what I mean? So it's been sort of a mismatch of that sort of stuff. They're going to need some guys to maybe hit a few more shots than they have, and I don't know how else to say it. Like I got on here the day after the Iowa game, and Juwan Gary played his butt off in that game for 13 and 13, but he was also 5 of 21 from the field. And I remember we were talking about it was like they didn't settle and they just kind of threw up some trash at the rim sometimes and weren't patient with it. They've really got to value every possession. They've had these moments in games they've lost where, like, you can go back to St. Mary's where they gave away like 3 or 4 possessions in a row and like a critical stretch in the second half on just sort of careless stuff. And it all kind of adds up over the season. And because of the question you asked, your margin for error isn't great enough that you can afford to do that. So they really do have to, think of every time they have the ball as sort of a precious situation, and obviously can't overthink it. But tonight has to be a night where you keep the turnovers down, you play smart, you play good around the rim, and hopefully Asijan hits a few too.
All right, so we have a kind of a body of work to work with watching Nebraska basketball. We've talked about kind of what they are, what they might not be, what we need them to be. If I take out Juwan Gary and I take out Bryce, and for laughs and giggles, you're like, it'd be interesting to see if this guy could do this in order to help Nebraska get wins. Who would you pick, and what would it be in this next portion of the basketball season for Nebraska?
Well, my go-to, but it's kind of played out, is Asijan, but they need something else with it. And I thought Andrew Morgan, especially in that first half on Sunday, I mean, you got to give him credit. He was really efficient. I think he was 7 of his first 8, and he had 17 points. They've sort of had this deal, though. It happened with Juwan against Rutgers, and then it happened with Morgan on Sunday, where Juwan had like 20 points, with 16 minutes left on Thursday last week, and that's where it ended. Not that he didn't do other stuff, but, it shut off there, and it shut off for Andrew too. And so I do think they've sort of missed those games where someone unexpected, like last year, would pop up each night and that guy suddenly would have 22 or something. Or they've sort of missed, I really believe, Rink Math and just the threat that he could hit that outside shot and how it spaced the floor and it opened so much other things. I think Andrew Morgan, to your question, is a guy that has always interested me this year. He's pretty effective and efficient in scoring it in certain spots. He missed a couple from behind the arc on Sunday that rimmed out. And I guess I wonder if there's just one other notch for him to go that maybe helps this team. We talk about chasing 3 with football of last year. Nebraska's lost 3 games by 3 points and won in overtime to Iowa. a guy like him hits an outside shot, a guy like Burke hits one more than you expect, that could be all the difference for this team.
I'm right there with you. Ravi's over here laughing at me, I promised him you and
Not
I did not have this
laughing.
conversation, but I'm saying like I've moved off on wanting kind of Burke to add some scoring punch, even though he fooled me again by hitting another early three at Maryland. But I am on Morgan in points in the paint because I do think he's efficient with the ball. He's not one of those guys. He doesn't have to have it a ton to be effective. I would love to see him kind of evolve to maybe help them get some easier baskets.
Yep. And, it'll be interesting what they do tonight because I think they're a little beat up. Fred didn't want to say who could, be questionable, but he said there were some guys nursing stuff that were out the other day, and so that's going to be something to watch. Aaron Eulis played a lot on Sunday. Obviously had 10 assists, had the bad turnover late, but played a good game other than that. So I'm curious, like, how those minutes shake up at point guard, with him and Wooster and all that. They even had both of them on the floor at one point against Maryland's pressure. So they got some interesting decisions to make with it. The question you asked, I don't think there's an easy answer. I guess that's the tough part.
If you would have said, like, to your point, like if you would have said, well, maybe Eulis turns into a little bit of a scoring option, right? Because he can do some other things. I'm just like, if he could only score, right? There's just always these little tweaks you would add to like the current guys to like get the best version of what you want to get wins.
Yeah, I don't want to knock them. Right now with the point guard spot, there was excitement, I think, going into the year. Okay, a true point guard, this is going to be fun. There's obviously good parts to it, but both guys have sort of struggled to finish. It's not their forte, and actually struggled at the free throw line too in some key moments.
That's the thing.
And I mean that kills you in these tight games when your point guard's an okay free throw shooter at best. And so, Raleigh's had some great moments, but you talk about a player who's got to be just the top of his game and the things that he's good at has to be accentuated. It's Raleigh Wooster. I mean, he's got to be a really good player for this team down the stretch and do what he does well. And that's basically it. Everybody's got to really excel at their gifts and get the most out of it.
That's our guy, Brian Christopherson, Husker247. BC, appreciate the time as always. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Sounds good, guys.